Thrilled to have back with us Chris Martenson, who is, of course, of the Crash Course fame, previously video only, now out in book form. Futurist, speaks around the world about a number of different issues, many times making predictions, many times right, unfortunately, as we have seen since we last talked to you about a year and a half or maybe even 2 years ago. Thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure.
There's so many things I want to talk about, and I want to get to Japan and Fukushima, and I want to talk about the stock market. But before we get to that, right now we're seeing a lot of discussion about budgets in government. And I'd be curious to get your take as a former executive, now living a very different life. When you hear about the discussions that are being had in Washington, D.C., and when I hear about it and hear about the minutia of what's being discussed, I feel like the big stuff is being missed for small details. I would be curious your take on it, and also your take on how much influence are corporations having on the budget discussion that's being had in Washington?
You know, when I hear about the debate, such as it is, I'm going to put quotes around that, debate that's going on around the budget, it reminds me of like a school board meeting, right, where they get a little bit of a cut, and what do they go after? The most popular stuff to make people cry first, right? We're going to go after sports and after-school programs, you know, instead of going after the heart of the issue. So 30 billion, 60 billion, Democrat, Republican, mouse, just complete change. It's absolute pocket change. We look at that stuff, those are about 3% and 1.5% of the deficit, not the total budget, just the deficit for this year. It's not credible. You want credible, you have to talk about the big four. You've got to get Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and defense on the table.
And this isn't an issue of if you're liberal, you think the topic should be one thing, and if you're conservative, you think the topic should be something else. I mean, we're talking just objectively looking at the numbers and the effect. When we talk about Corporation for Public Broadcasting, it's literally a drop in the bucket compared to the issues you're talking about. So the obvious question is, why isn't it a part of the corporate media discourse? Why isn't it a bigger part of the actual discussion we hear about?
Well, yeah, there are all kinds of theories abound. I mean, just let's take defense for a minute. You know, we can add it up and look at it that the United States spends more combined than the rest of the world. It's phenomenal how much we spend. Could we find savings there? Absolutely. And could we still have a safe and secure country? No question. But we're not talking about it. And there's all kinds of conflicts of interest in that story, and that's the world we're in. But even just back up a second, if we continue to run these deficits at these levels, we will face a fiscal emergency in this country, where instead of by design, we get to reshape our spending priorities, it's by disaster. And specifically, I'm talking, it's a bond market disaster. All of a sudden, somebody steps away from the treasury auctions, interest rates shoot up, we can't control it. Next thing you know, we have short-term rates of 5, 6, 7, 8, 10%, and it's off into the ether at that point.
So many times we hear many progressives point out and say this obsession that we are seeing from the right, from groups like the Tea Party caucus, so on and so forth, about the deficit as an excuse or as the reason why we can't spend money on whatever, fill in the blank. A lot of times progressives will say that's not really an issue. That's not really actually going to stop the country from running. There's plenty of things that could. And even if you believe that, well, maybe we don't need 50 military bases in Germany. Maybe 40 would keep us safe, and that would make a much bigger difference in the budget than a couple of billion to NPR, for example. But the question I want to get back to is, why will it actually be such a problem for the day-to-day, you know, for Lewis, for Natan, for me, day-to-day, if we continue to run these deficits? When many more progressive economists are saying we need to be spending, the deficit is not the number one priority, we need to be creating jobs, which, by the way, John Boehner said was his priority, not acting on it. Day to day, why will it affect us?
So I completely disagree with anybody, conservative or liberal, who says that our deficits aren't a problem, that this is a necessary level of stimulus we have to spend. When you look at how our budget's constructed right now, how much of this is mandatory? We think of stimulus spending as it's rather discretionary, right? We're going to ramp it up during emergencies and dial it back down when the emergency passes.
Sure.
But most of our spending now, the lion's share, is mandatory. That's the stuff we have to talk about.
Mandatory in what sense?
Mandatory meaning that it's on autopilot. The money's going to go out the door, whether or not Congress decides to appropriate any money or pass anything or anything, right? It's mandatory spending. So interest on the national debt. You don't pay it, you default on your bonds, things go haywire in a hurry. So that's kind of mandatory.
And it's interesting you mentioned that, because when we saw the Obama administration, and I know I get criticized because we're a progressive show, and sometimes I criticize the president very often recently, But the reality is, when we heard the talking points about the latest Obama budget, we heard this does not add to the deficit. It wasn't even including the interest payments that we have no choice about making. That's there. Those are there. Is that disingenuous? You're mentioning it as a key point in this discussion when many of the White House staffers were using talking points that completely disregarded that interest. What do you think?
There's so much smoke and mirrors in the budget, kabuki theater, as it happens. Every administration. Listen, we're in the middle of a status quo. DC, this is how it operates. And what I'm worried about, my chief concern, is that DC is going to continue to do what it does, which is they'll have partisan battles over relatively minuscule things while they kick the can down the road. Eventually, the future arrives, and my supposition is the future's here. We are this close to having a full-on fiscal emergency. The IMF is warning us about our deficit levels. We have the highest level of deficit now of any nation, any advanced nation, in terms of deficit compared to GDP. We're worse than Greece. We're worse than Ireland. We're worse than Portugal. I mean, this is not stellar company. And yes, we're the United States, so we get a little extra leeway. But here's the thing. If and when the world revolts against that, our standard of living here in this country, our opportunities change literally overnight.
But how will it happen? I mean, so in other words, we wake up one day, what door have we walked through that we can't walk back from? What will happen?
What happens is right now about half of all bonds that are sold at the government level, this is sovereign debt, U.S. Treasury bonds, are bought by foreigners. So foreigners go on strike and they say, we're all done with that. Now, who's going to buy those? Well, if we can't find enough buyers, the way you find more buyers is you keep raising the interest rate until somebody gets interested. Like for me, right now, they're offering, 1.5% on a 2-year bond? I'm not interested. 10%, I'm interested. Well, now think about if our government has to start offering 10, 11, 12, 13, 14%. All of a sudden, debt payments, the interest portion on the debt payment suddenly goes from maybe 3% of GDP to 5 to 10. All of a sudden, it consumes all of your budget. Next thing you know, you get in that spot.
Conceptually, I get it.
Yeah, it's a spiral.
But would it really? I think that there would probably be some kind of deal made behind the scenes at 2, 3, 4%. I mean, what would it really take to get up to where 10% is where it needs to be in order to get people interested and the spiral takes place?
Well, in the story of Greece, we found out it takes about 2 months. It's really, really rapid when you get that dynamic started. It doesn't take much for it to get started. Once it does, it's over very rapidly. And in my work, I have opportunities to hang out with and talk with people from Wall Street, and I've been shocked at what some of these people have been telling me. They're saying, yes, we're dancing while there's still music, they're trading bonds, they're doing fixed income deals, but they're also saying this is starting to look really bad. And I had one trader, and this shocked me to my core, he said, if Ben Bernanke does QE3, that means quantitative easing, third program at the end of June, fires up another one. He says, that's it, I'm all done with fiat money as a concept. Really? By the time the people who are that deeply embedded in the system are using words like that, it tells you we're pretty far along in this narrative of decay around the dollar. That's what we're risking here. We're risking not just our way of life, but the dollar. That's an enormous thing to play any sort of a game with. And to bring it all back, that's what we're risking in our gamesmanship. Is it 30 billion? Is it 60 billion? I don't care. I care that what we're really doing is we're risking literally the foundation of our country, the dollar itself. It's that serious.
Now, do you advocate, in hearing that, I hear you kind of taking what really does sound like your honest, nonpartisan stance on this, which is you do believe that the deficit is a problem, but at the same time, you don't believe that 30 or 60 billion in these cuts are really the focus. You mentioned the big four, and I do agree with that. You mentioned the trader, the Wall Street trader. What is your reaction to the fact that nobody from Wall Street has gone to jail for any of the scams, for any of the manipulations, for everything that has gone on in the last 6 to 8 years that we've constantly been hearing about? Not a single person has been held accountable. What does that tell us?
We only know of one person so far who's gone to prison over the subprime crisis. And that was a guy like you or me, Joe Sixpack guy, right, who was caught signing one of the liar loans from Countrywide. Now, Countrywide was headed up by Angelo Muzzillo, right, who admitted no wrongdoing but gave $67.5 million back to the government. He absolutely committed fraud. As high a level of fraud as you will ever find, as clear a case as you will ever find. That was not prosecuted under the Bush administration, and now the Obama administration under Eric Holder dropped it. How could you drop a case against this guy? Just to use him as an example, there are hundreds of other examples. Clear, obvious cases of fraud, fraudulent intent, misstatements, perjury, the whole 9 yards.
Why hasn't anyone gone to jail?
You tell me. It's one of the most frustrating things I've ever encountered because it's just as clear as can be. What I worry about is that as soon as it's people like us start figuring out there's 2 sets of laws in this country, aren't there? There's one for me. Like I get a speeding ticket, I'm in trouble.
For the richest 10%.
Yep.
Which I think is kind of where the majority of government policy and corporate business is geared towards. And then there's, 90%, the other 90%.
There are 2 sets of laws on the books right now. That's what we can take from this. And to me, that's absolutely, again, I used the word before, I'll use it again. It's corrosive to our fabric of our society, to what we stand for. This is part of the reason I think so many people are concerned, because when you see that not only is the fox guarding the hen house, but their other foxes are protecting the other foxes, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't vote in anybody different, apparently. There's nobody I can write to. I can stand out in the rain with placards all day. So it's that sense of powerlessness that comes from this.
This is interesting you mentioned that, because on the last show, Lewis, we have this ongoing thing. Lewis does not vote, and he has
just encourages him, huh?
It's a long exactly, and people wrote to me, and many people said, you know what? Yeah, even if everybody you're choosing between is bad, at least you can choose someone that you feel is slightly less bad, and at least you're doing something. And others said, you know what? I completely agree with Lewis. We're completely powerless. We get a vote, but it doesn't really make any kind of substantive difference. And even if the guy we want, guy or gal we want to win wins, nothing really will change. Mm-hmm. Is that, are you pessimistic in that sense, that you feel the average person is powerless?
Well, yes and no. Yes, I believe that the most likely outcome here is some sort of a train wreck, because we have no power, because the voice of the people can't be expressed. The voices that are in power will continue to express themselves. Listen, they've already led us to the biggest financial disaster we've ever seen. We are on the road to a major economic crisis, a really big one that'll make 2008 look like a walk in the park.
You think so?
Absolutely, no question about it. The risks are higher today than I've ever seen them. So I hold that. I say, yes, I'm pessimistic in the sense I'm pretty sure that's going to happen, but I'm very optimistic, and the work I do is all around letting people know what our options are, because we can sidestep some of the silliness here, and we can take charge of our own lives, even if the national narrative seems to be off the rails. I'm convinced that personally there's a lot we can do.
And again, we're speaking with Chris Martenson. The website is chrismartenson.com. The new book, The Crash Course, The Unsustainable Future of Our Economy, Energy, and Environment, is now available. It
is available. It should be in all the bookstores, and Amazon, of course, carries it.
Given all of these areas in which the situation seems to be stacked against the bottom 90% or the average guy, or whatever term we want to use, what do you advise people? And I'm not asking you to give anybody specific advice, but in general, I mean, does it make sense to stay completely out of the stock market, given how open it is to manipulation and corruption and all of these things? Do you stay out of it altogether? If so, people need to invest in something that will earn more than the 1% you mentioned on bonds.
So what I try and do is help control some risks. One of the things I learned a while ago, I used to believe in the stock market, kept all my, 40% in bonds, 60 stocks, all that whole nonsense. I think it's nonsense now because we learned some things. We learned about these high-frequency trading algorithms, which are black boxes operating on Wall Street. The firms that run them, there's one firm that has never turned in a losing trading day in 4 years running now. Not one.
They have all the smartest people, obviously.
Obviously. So trading involves risk. If even there's a 1% risk of loss, you will lose sometime in 4 years, or it's statistically off the charts, right? So we can tell, just looking at that guess what? It's not fair. Whatever trading they're doing is not the same thing that you and I engage in when we buy a stock. Same thing is going on with bonds. I'm convinced that the whole thing is really manipulated at this point, that there are people who can play that game for their benefit, right? And when they get in trouble, they get bailed out anyway. I mean, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, all these big players, they bet the farm, lost the farm, and were given the farm back. And now they're giving themselves immense bonuses. So
what does the average person do with their money?
So I think that it's time to reorient ourselves a little bit. Primary wealth. Once upon a time, nobody was fooled by this. You were landed gentry. That's where wealth came from. You had soil, you had access to water, you had timber, you had all of these things. Secondary wealth, real productive enterprise, where you're taking soil, turning it into food, getting that to market. Something like that. But third order, stocks, bonds, all that, I'm advising people, get out of that game, get yourself back into real productive enterprise at the local level as much as you possibly can.